Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We have an exciting show for you today. And back by popular demand is Matt Pocock. But before I bring him on, today is Thursday. And what we normally do is our throwback segment. So producer, since we have such an exciting show, let's go ahead and get that out the way now and see what we have. If you could only access 3 GitHub repos while learning to code, what would they be? My top 3 would be topics that are useful for almost any stack. The art of the command line, because you gotta know the terminal, and this repo covers several. Design patterns, since these principles help avoid reinventing solutions to common coding problems. And the algorithms, for when the coding gets advanced, especially if performance is key. What 3 repos would you choose? Nice. I didn't even know that they had like repos that were dedicated to just specific areas like design patterns. So that is now one of my favorites. But I want to say hello to everyone. Adriano in the chat. Amadou, good morning. Hello to G5, Ben P, and Arnett, who is like really psyched today. He's going Pocock, 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 Pocock. I feel the excitement. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into and introduce Matt. He is the TypeScript expert that you guys have wanted by popular demand. So let's go ahead and bring him up.
Yo, Matt, how's it going, Reynald? You all right?
I'm doing great. Excited. Finally get to host a live stream with you. Heard a lot of great things. I've seen like the previous streams before. It's been awesome like watching your work. So glad to see what you got today.
Awesome.
What do you have to show us today?
Well, we are trying to answer the question today, can VS Code teach you TypeScript? And it's a really interesting question because VS Code has a lot of really cool features and you can use them to understand the TypeScript compiler better. And I've built something which is going to hopefully make that process even easier for you.
Now, how did this come about? Like, that's an interesting question, though. Like, can VS Code teach you TypeScript? Do you mean like in an interactive way?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I'm on here for the 3rd time, right? So I'm running out of things to talk about. You know, so I had to be creative to think of something to get myself back on, you know. But yeah, I'm really interested in it because, you know, the usual way you learn something is either you learn it on the job or you learn it from free resources or you learn it by basically tabbing out of your main like development environment and going to somewhere bespoke, you know, like you go into Codecademy or something, or you look at a course or something, you watch videos. I'm really interested in the idea that you could learn TypeScript just inside the development environment where you work every day. And that's an area that I think is kind of underexplored in general. And that's where my focus is at the moment, or at least something I'm really fascinated by.
Nice, nice. Yeah, like the process of learning has always been fascinating for me because like I remember like when I was like younger, I was always impressed how some people just like learn much quicker than others. And later on, I kind of like realized, you know, there's like 3 different ways of learning. There's just like passive, where you're just like reading about something. Then there's actually doing it, right? Which is kind of like what we're going to be involved in. And then there's also a level of learning where you're actually teaching something. So you're actually going to be hitting like those 2 spots because you're going to be teaching us, but also showing us like how to be interactive. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look.
Well, let's do it. So, okay, if we talk about TypeScript and we think about TypeScript, we're kind of talking like basically about syntax that's put on top of JavaScript. Because we've got here, let's say we've got some code or whatever. And this code, let's say we've got a function, so const func equals whatever. And I'm inside a TypeScript file. So if I add something to this, then it's going to give me an error here. And this error is going to say parameter A implicitly has an any type. Okay, well, that's a hellish error to jump into. You've had a bit of experience with TypeScript, right? What's your background with TS?
Yeah, my background, I was introduced to TypeScript when I was learning Angular. So it was through that roundabout way. So I'm familiar with it, but I never like just coded something only in TypeScript.
Cool. Well, let's say that we have this error then. And from a newbie perspective, this error is going to be fairly hellish to understand because what it's saying, parameter A implicitly has an any type. Parameter A implicitly has an any type. Now, what the hell does this mean? God, I can't even spell today. Has an any type. Well, we need to understand what an any type is. We need to understand that this is a parameter. And TypeScript has this horrible reputation for having really, really hard to read, nasty errors. So I've made an extension, and this extension has been out for a while, actually, and it's called Total TypeScript. So it is somewhere up here, Total TypeScript. And what this does is it basically does two things for us. It basically takes the errors that you had before, and it translates them into human readable language. So if we actually look back at our parameter A implicitly has an any type, we can take a look at this and we can say, I don't know what type A is supposed to be, so I've defaulted it to any. Your tsconfig file says I should throw an error here. How cool is that?
That's awesome.
If you have okay, sorry, continue.
First thing that comes to my mind is how. I'm thinking AI. Are you using that? I'm probably jumping ahead of you.
I am not using AI, actually. This is just like manual translations that have been contributed either by me or by the community. So this VS Code extension basically takes in this message, pumps it through our system, and that translates it into human readable, basically that's been edited by me and by the community. So this feels like an amazing spot for AI to get involved, actually. It really could be an amazing spot, but I haven't implemented it yet. I haven't tooled around with AI. But you can see there's an opportunity here to take something that we think is cryptic and then basically translate it into something much more readable.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, because when I first started learning how to code, one of the things that I hated was looking at documentation that was so unfriendly. And sometimes I felt authors did that just to almost sound smart rather than actually caring that people actually understand what they're reading. So the fact that we could actually read and understand this in a human fashion, that's very appreciative.
It's very cool. And of course, you're right. Like the often documentation and error messages like this, it's basically you need to be precise instead of readable. And this is a very precise error message. Parameter A implicitly has an any type, but for someone who doesn't understand it, it's impossible to get. Now, if we look at this, if we say there's another version of this, which if we say type func is, let's say it's a promise that returns a string. And we have like const promise func here is going to be async, and it's going to return, let's say it just returns a number. If I try to assign it here, and you can ignore the blue lines for now, then this is going to be quite a big error. It's going to be type blah, blah, blah is not assignable to type func, type promise number is not assignable to type promise string, type number is not assignable to type string. You get like this tiers of errors here where you have an error on the top level, then you have an indented error just below it, and then you have another error indented just below it. And it feels just like this wall of text that it's hitting you. You know, like you can have like 20 lines of these. They can be enormous, great big errors. And what the extension does is it basically just sort of like pulls these into individual lines so that you can view them. And then it's really easy to read. Type number is not assignable to type string, because this function is supposed to return a string, but instead it returns a number. So we can fix this just by putting a string here instead.
By the way, what was the name of this extension again? Someone in the chat is asking, John Smith.
This is Total TypeScript extension. We've got a link to it. Peggy, you want to put the link up below? There's like an AKA in there. There we go.
Perfect. Thanks.
It's beautiful. And then you might be thinking, what are these blue lines here? Well, these blue lines, we got the red lines for the errors, and these come from TypeScript. But I was thinking, how cool would it be if you could actually learn TypeScript, understand it just by being in your IDE? And what I realized was there's nothing out there that sort of like looks at some code and tells you what it's doing or tells you what it is. Or there are some things out there that we'll look at in a minute. But I wanted something that was specifically for TypeScript syntax. And so I made it. What I did was, we can see, like, if I delete a little bit of this code, and maybe delete this, let's say, then we have a type func here. And what this is doing is, on this line here, is it's saying type keyword. This is a type alias. It's like an interface, but it can't be extended, and it can represent things that interfaces can't. Pretty cool. Okay. And then we can press learn more. And this actually takes us to the TypeScript docs that like talks about this specific piece of syntax. This is going to open on another page, of course. Let me pull this open so it's over here. There we go. And so we've literally now on type aliases, wherever they're gone.
Nice.
Here. So cool. And this can work for really complex stuff as well. But the coolest thing is that you can mark it as learned. And when you mark it as learned, it basically gets rid of that blue line. It saves it, understands that you've learned it, and it doesn't show you that hint again. And so here we've got a basic type. Okay, string, number, and boolean, all basic types. That's amazing. Of course, it sent it off to the wrong bit, but let me pull it out over here. And there we go, string, number, and boolean. And this can work for really complicated types too. So let's say we've got a type is tuple, for instance. We can say this is a T, and T extends read-only any. Let's say true or false. It's like, whoa, there's so much crazy syntax here. Well, let's break it down. We've got a conditional type here. Okay, this is a conditional type. It's kind of like an if-else logic in TypeScript, but at the type level. Very cool. We've got an any array. Okay, we've got a few things here. This is an array type. It represents an array which can be any length. Mark that as learned. Any type. Okay, cool. Nice. And we've got true and a false, which is literal types. It's so cool. And you just get to basically, whenever you encounter a new piece of code that you've not seen before, then the extension will know it, and it will show you a little blue line with exactly where in the documentation you can look to understand it.
Nice. Now, what if someone feels like they were already comfortable with a lot of this because they've been doing TypeScript for a while? Is there a way that they can like specify to disable that or partially disable some of it?
Absolutely. So you can say total TypeScript, hide basic tips, true. So this will just show you only the advanced stuff. Or if you want to disable all of them, you can go hide all tips, true. And this will just disable that functionality, and you're just left with the error translator.
Nice. Now, what about the opposite? Like, let's say you've marked a lot of things learned, and you're like, you know what? I guess I didn't learn that much because I forgot about it. Can you undo it somehow?
Of course, you've got your hidden tips that are just in your settings here. So when we add something to a hidden tip, for instance, then you can say, where were we before? Let me go back. We can say, okay, I kind of need to revisit conditional types again. Let me figure that out. You can just like go through here and like delete all of your hidden tips if you want to, and then they start reappearing back here. So it's basically all done in settings.json.
Nice.
So there we go. This is something I've been working on kind of as part of my TypeScript course, which is at totaltypescript.com. And this is free, of course, so you can download it right now and have a play. And so what do you think of this? It's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, I'm going through the comments right now, and it looks like we've already answered like some of those questions. Francisco Gomez has just asked if we can disable it, and we just showed that right now. And someone else is asking if
we've got some like banging tunes in the background.
Yeah, I have like some more. Someone was asking about like what the music is. It's default music with StreamYard. I don't know the actual name, so sorry.
Absolute banger. Loving it.
Yeah, we got to keep things exciting around here. So no, this sounds like a really cool. Now, the other thing that comes to my mind when it comes to like learning, what if someone wanted to take notes on some of this? Are you thinking about, or do you already have like some features where they're able to add like additional notes? Or...
No, this is basically the feature set that we have right now. This is I'm thinking about like, because in order to build this, I had to build basically a parser to like dive into TypeScript, pull out the abstract syntax tree, and then like work out which nodes I wanted to put blue lines under what conditions I wanted to put blue lines under them. So what I've ended up with is like a tool that can basically dive into any repo and pull out all of the interesting, complicated TypeScript syntax. So I'm thinking of, there might be something there like a build your own tutorial or something mad. But yeah, I mean, like this is the world's the oyster, basically. Like, I can build anything I want with this. But there are several other things, like even if you don't want to install this extension, for instance, let's say we go into settings.json. I'm really intrigued by, if I just disable all of these hints, total TypeScript, idle tips, true. I also want to show off some of the features of VS Code and like how much TypeScript gives you in terms of tools that you can use to teach yourself with it. Because, sure, we've got like this function here, function A, but let's actually dive back here. Let's look at this code here, search params, and I'm just going to hide this activity bar for now. So we're basically creating a bit of code here, and it's using search params equals new URL, whatever. In fact, I'll just call this URL. So new URL, I'm not importing this from anywhere. This is a global that's just available to me. And new URL actually comes from the DOM. So I can pull in stuff from the DOM here. And if I want to understand how this works, I can basically just hover over it. And if I pass the wrong parameter to it, then it's going to yell at me. Whereas if I were to, let's say, just rename this file into, where are we? Gosh, this is a huge thing. Here we go. If I were to rename this file into index.js, then I'd basically be getting none of this stuff. I still get a little bit of sort of TypeScript syntax, but I have to manually check whether what I've passed it is valid. So TypeScript is already kind of teaching you DOM attributes and DOM elements just by existing in VS Code. And so this hover is actually really, really crucial. And we can even go one step further, which is we can look at the type definition for URL. We can look and we can go, if I right click on it and go to definition, and we end up in a kind of mad setup here where we have url.d.ts, lib.dom.d.ts. And have you ever seen any of these before? How scary is this to you? Yeah. Extremely terrifying. Basically, what these do is they let you kind of, or they provide the definitions of the types for all of the DOM elements for everything that is global in JavaScript. So if you think like in Node, for instance, you've got things like process.env. Process.env, we can take a look at it. It says node.js.process.env. We can hover over it, see what's going on. We even get like a really nice readout and description. And this is all from just native TypeScript in VS Code. We can command click on it, or rather do a go to definition. And we can see this is where, if we zoom right out here, my gosh, look at all this stuff. These are the definitions for how Node.js works in TypeScript. And they're global, so you can access them. I mean, how this is crazy. Like, if you can understand this stuff and what it's trying to teach you and read some of this stuff, then you can understand what Node is doing and what methods are available and what variables are available.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, like, on from a creative, like from an authoring perspective, to actually customize and create like this extension with this type of behavior, what was like what was your process? Because there are some people that want to think about like creating their own extensions, and we did have live streams on just creating extensions themselves. But for this type of content, like, what was your process? Like, what made you think, you know, I think this might be useful? Let me go ahead and note that.
Absolutely. So, I mean, so the first thing I started with is like, there's not actually a lot of stuff available out there, not a lot of documentation on building your own extensions. I had to start really from copying other people's extensions. So the one I copied was like the Tailwind extension, if you know that one, which is Tailwind is like a CSS utility library, and it sort of bundles a lot of class names into your application, and usually you don't get autocomplete on them. For an extension that I was building at the time, which I was doing for work, I wanted sort of similar functionality. And so I looked at that. And I basically copy and pasted that repo over, and it has a package.json. And inside the package.json, you have a lot of things in there that you need to fill in. That's like the name of your extension, the unique ID that it's going to be there, and the commands and things that it provides. Package.json is actually really crucial when you're building a VS Code extension. And then you also need to add a build process in there as well, because if you're building it in TypeScript, which I would absolutely suggest you do, then you need to transform your TypeScript files into JavaScript. So once you've figured out a bundler, once you've got your package.json figured out, and once you've you can actually like compile your stuff, pull it into a folder, and then just like plop it into the VS Code marketplace, you've got an extension and it's out there. And so that's the kind of basic idea. Package.json, some JavaScript files, and you can create an extension. And a lot of it comes from, basically there's a VS Code, I can't remember what it is. I think it's like a VS Code package that you can basically pull in, and then you get all of the type definitions for the globals that are available in VS Code, because it's a special environment. It's not like Node, and it's not like the browser. There's only certain things available.
Right. Let's see what else some other people here are saying. VJ says, did not know go-to-defs work in JS module.
Yep. And it works because actually TypeScript is powering up the JavaScript that's there. If we dive back in, can I add my thing? Could you add my screen back in? Thank you very much. There are some things that work in JavaScript and some things that don't. So if we have, for instance, let's say we have a let a equals 1, and then we say const b equals a, const c equals a. I'm kind of intrigued to see if this works. I wonder if we can do like a rename symbol here. Yeah, we should be able to. So renamed. And what I can do then is I can just go renamed, and all of the examples of a then get named to renamed. And in TypeScript, this can work across modules as well. So you can be importing something like from a different module, and it will rename it across different files, which is super duper cool. I'm not sure if that's possible in JS. I'm kind of tempted to see if we can figure it out. So we can say importing dot, whoops, naturally wrote a, oh my God, a TS file there. We can say import from index. Let's say we import a1, and then in the other file, we can say import a from index, and we'll go const b equals a, const c equals a. So now in theory, what I should be able to do is in the original file in index.js, I should be able to rename this, and let's see if it goes through. Renamed. Oh, beautiful. So it renamed all of the A's from that to renamed. That's pretty sweet. So this actually works in JS, but it can, and the reason why is because TypeScript is scanning it and figuring out the relationships between all the pieces and renaming it for you. Carry on.
Nice. Francisco asks, is the TypeScript extension open source? It is, but he also asked, can we contribute? Like, what's the process there? Like, do you got, like, if someone wanted to contribute, is it pretty easy for them to be able to get accepted, or?
It's like, yeah, you can definitely try and contribute. There's a contributing process for translations at the moment. So we're always looking for error translations for people who's interested in that. I'm mostly looking at it from, like, if something that you might want to contribute is being able to, like, add new tips, for instance, which is always useful. I've got a really nice setup there, but I haven't documented it yet. So you can definitely sort of have a look and play around with it. But there is a repo. If you go on the marketplace, you can get directed over to the GitHub repo from there.
Got it. Got it. All right. Let's see what else here.
I'm also more than happy to open up the floor to any random TypeScript questions that you've been hanging around with. Anything you want explained, any complicated syntax. This is like my speciality. I'm more than happy to just talk and talk and talk about TypeScript.
Yeah, so you guys drop some TypeScript questions that you might have. Um, he has been doing TypeScript for quite some time. By the way, how did you get into focusing mainly on TypeScript? And
Mm.
was that like the first language that you even started? I'm assuming it's probably something else, and then you learned about TypeScript and fell in love with that.
Well, I mean, I've basically been a one language developer for like my whole career. So I've only done JavaScript and now TypeScript. I was like a PHP developer as like my first job, but that was mostly sort of like working on the front end of an application with a little bit of PHP, mostly JavaScript. And
Okay.
like this has actually really benefited me in my career because it's meant I can go very deep on one language and kind of understand all of its ins and outs. And not only that, but JavaScript and TypeScript, when I started getting into it a few years ago, I was kind of lucky enough to be at the wave of just an extremely huge adoption of TypeScript. TypeScript adoption has gone through the roof now. It's now
Yeah,
the
yeah.
language on GitHub, I think. Um, so
Mainly because of single page applications, would you say?
I think, I don't know. I don't know if SPAs are the root cause of it. I think probably because there's a lot of SSR frameworks, a lot of front end frameworks now that cover the whole gamut of things that you could want from your front end, and that are not SPAs that are incredibly popular. So Next.js, very, very popular. Vite, very, very popular. Vue, Nuxt, SvelteKit and Svelte are extremely popular. All of them use JavaScript and TypeScript, really. And TypeScript kind of is the thing that holds them together and makes them into enterprise products. Because if we were still using JavaScript, then I think a lot of these frameworks would not have the confidence or not give you enough confidence to ship. But TypeScript like just lets you be really secure, makes your tooling really good, as we've seen with like the rename symbol and stuff. And yeah, it's TypeScript, I think, is at the core of a new wave of front-end frameworks, actually.
Nice. Now, Giordano mentions that he's a medium Angular developer, but he'd like to know how to improve his TypeScript knowledge. Now, you have this awesome extension that you built that's going to help like some of the learning process. But in addition to that, what would you say are some like key resources you would suggest someone to review?
Absolutely. I would say take my TypeScript course, which is free on totaltypescript.com. There's like a section on free tutorials where you basically just, it takes you through all the stuff you need to do to be able to say, yes, I am a TypeScript developer. I'd say if you're an Angular dev, I don't have that much experience with Angular, so I'm not entirely sure of all the pieces that you might want to study for that, especially. But I know that a core knowledge of TypeScript and understanding all of its pieces and understanding how that fits with Angular is definitely going to work for you. And also, I'd say doing what we're doing now and playing around with all the things that VS Code can do is super nice too. So just being able to understand, okay, I can hover over things to understand how they're defined. I can do a go to definition and try to understand some of the Angular type definitions. And I can, just basically use these powerful tools that we've got at our disposal.
Nice. Now, Camaris says going over generics would be useful. Is that something that you cover in your course, or any tips you might want to tell them about generics?
Absolutely. Well, let's do some generic stuff. Why not? Could we have my thing? Thank you. Okay. So generics. What are generics? Let's do it. Have you heard of generics, by the way, Reynald?
Yes, I have in the context of Java and C#. Haven't seen it with TypeScript, but I feel like once one language discovers something that's really useful, the other language eventually has their own version of it.
So I'm actually really interested in hearing from you what generics means to you in like a C# Java context. Because again, I'm like a one language developer. You're kind of coming in from another land to explain it to me.
Yeah, I mean, like when I think of generics, I think of a way of coding modular code that's extremely reusable. That's in its core, that's essentially what it's about. It's about modularity. How would
Yes.
you define it?
That's a great way of saying it. I would say it's about making a function generic, right? And about making a function reusable and basically making an abstraction better. So let's think about generics. Like, you can use generics in like several different ways in TypeScript. So imagine that we have a type to array, or for instance, like array of. Now, we can basically say, okay, imagine this is an array of strings. So we would call this array of strings. Let's make another one saying array of numbers, for instance, an array of Booleans. And I'll fix these in a second. So, okay, there's kind of quite a lot of duplication here. Wouldn't it be so cool if we could just basically say type array of is going to be like something that we can basically call as a function in order to get all of these things out? Well, it turns out there is actually one. There's one in TypeScript where you can say called array. So I don't even need to define it actually, but in fact, let me just define a second one here. So I'm going to say array of, and I'm going to say array of t. Now, array of t, and I'm going to put it here as t array. What this does is it basically adds a type argument to this type. And now every time I declare this, if I say array of string, for instance, I have to pass it another type. When I pass it another type, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, I'm basically calling the type of array of, passing it another type of strings in order to basically get back another type. So array of strings is now string array, and I can do anything I want in here. So I can say type data shape. Let's say I have a DTO that I'm getting back from my database, and I'm saying, okay, we have data, which is t, and we always have an error, which is a string. So let's say that we have type user data. It's going to be data shape, and I'll pass it, let's say name, string, and ID string. Now, user data has data, name ID, and error string. So this is the first use case for generics, where you can actually create types out of other types. And this is all very meta. Like, how do we actually put this on the runtime and make things out of this? Well, let's say that we have a const. Let's say we have a const fetch function. Fetch something. And we're going to say we pass in a URL, which is a string. And we're going to return fetch URL, then res, oops, oh my God, guys, here we go, res.json. So when we call this, if we say const fetch something, fetch something, then, and let's just fetch a user, for instance. And then this result here, this is going to be typed as any. And we've already seen that any's in our code are sort of bad. Like, if TypeScript were more a bit wired in here, it would be able to give us an error for this any. But currently, this result basically isn't very useful. What I'd love to do is I'd love to basically say to fetch something, this is the type of the thing that you're going to return. And because this is a pretty generic function, because we're basically able to fetch any endpoint with this, and we want to be able to say to it, this is the type of thing you're going to get back. Well, just like a t we can add up there, we can actually add a t just here. And this t acts as a type argument that this function now can be passed. So we can actually pass it something. We can say, let's say we pass in ID string, name string. Mm-hmm. Now, this t is like currently unused. It's declared, but its value is never read. I noticed that t has been declared, but it's never used in the code. So we can actually say this function now returns a promise containing t. And now the thing that we pass into fetch something gets inferred into the result. So we get result, ID, and name. There's two implementations of generics here. There's one where you pass types to other types, and one where you can actually pass types to functions in order for that function to basically grab it out. So,
and by the way, someone's like mentioning it could be anything but T, right? And yes, I think T is just like the standard, since we're thinking in terms of types, but you could really put any letter, at least for other languages you can.
Absolutely.
For here, right?
You can do T whatever. Like T is the kind of standard thing. yeah, it's just a convention. I think it comes from Java and C# maybe actually. But yeah, I like to use T because this is quite controversial, using these short generic names, because surely you should actually name them kind of what they are. But I like to teach this in my course because in the real world, in real type definitions, you're going to see these and you kind of need to get used to them. So annoyingly, it's a convention that's used even by the TypeScript team. So yeah, it's here to stay.
Right.
But this is
and
the basic idea.
And conventions are important, especially if you want readability to be a simple thing when other people are reading your code. So I'm glad you're following conventions.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's. What else we got?
Let's see here.
I've got a cool one. Yeah, generics always scare me. Is that the one you're looking at?
That's the one I was just about to read, by VJ. Generics always scares me. I wonder why so many library authors go crazy with generics and make their type definitions impossible to read. Have you been in those situations?
Yes, I have. I was part of the core team of a library called XState, and XState is a finite state machine library, state chart library. I'm not part of that team anymore. They're still lovely people. My very good friends are there. And we had some really crazy type definitions. The reason that library authors often make like complicated stuff like this, that is because their libraries need to be very, very generic. They need to serve lots and lots of different use cases. And this means that you get some really complicated type level code, because you need to, let's say, if you're creating like a fetching function, like for instance, a React hook, which can fetch code from your, or fetch stuff from your backend. You need to be prepared for any type of data to come back, any type of data to be put into that fetching function. You need to be prepared for lots of different behaviors, and everything that you need to make generic in your application or in your library needs to have a generic in there somewhere, needs to have a type argument in there somewhere, needs to have a T or a U or a V or a T query or a T data or whatever. So yeah, that's the reason why libraries are basically under pressure, are incentivized to make TypeScript, make definitions that are really hard to read, is because those are hard to write. That's a lot of requirements to get right. And if they don't do that, then people are going to be like having to basically force these functions, which aren't inferring what they want to infer, to like force them to be certain types. So that's why, definitely. It's I've been in that position before. It's just something you got to learn, you know, something you got to learn to live with, is the fact that being a library author in this day and age means you need to understand TypeScript at a very deep level.
Nice. Now, Francisco Gomez also asked, it would be awesome if you can talk about satisfies.
Satisfies. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I've put my own thing off again. I need Peggy to bring back my screen. Let's talk about satisfies. Satisfies is really cool. I wanted to actually make a video about this the other day. I've got a YouTube channel, by the way, in case you guys are interested. If you just look at Matt Pocock TypeScript, I'll pop up. The thing about satisfies is, let's say you have some config here. Now, imagine that you have some config, and these are, let's say, like roots, for instance. So in each root here, let's say you have user, let's say you have, which is an object. Let's say you have admin, which is an object. And let's say you have admin dashboard or something, or admin settings. So in each of these roots, you imagine that you're creating some config here, and you want like a fetch function in each one. And you have fetch here, and you have fetch there. But you've forgotten to add fetch here. So you say, whoops, this isn't good. So you create a type. And this type is going to express what you want your roots to be. So you would say type roots config. And this is going to be a record of string and then an object with a fetch in it. And this, by the way, this syntax basically creates like a, this record is like a map. So it's creating an object where, with a set of properties, k of type t. Here you go, these single variable names again. And basically this creates a type that's supposed to represent a map. Now, this roots, what it does is, if you say roots config, and you assign it to be that type. This means that roots now, we're going to get an error down here because we didn't provide fetch. Is really good. But if we then try to say, okay, I want to go roots dot user dot fetch, for instance, you notice that this actually, if we get this wrong, then it's not going to give me an error, even though this is going to fail at runtime.
Okay.
That's because what we've done here is we've basically said these roots now are this type. And this type has a string in the key. In other words, we've lost actually all of the autocomplete when you go roots dot whatever. So it's not giving me the right options back. And that's because when you assign it in this way, you're basically overriding what TypeScript infers at that position. So the difference then is between this, we could, instead of doing that, we could do roots satisfies roots config. Now the difference here is that instead of overriding it, instead of saying, okay, this is roots config, nothing else, it says, okay, I want this to satisfy this contract. And while you're satisfying it, I still want you to infer user, admin, and admin settings. So now what you can do is do roots, and you get the autocomplete here. So you get admin, you get admin settings, and you get user. Because if you don't do this, then TypeScript basically stops inferring, and it stops caring about what the actual strings are. It just checks that this matches, and then defaults it to roots config. So basically, it's super good for declaring config objects like this, where you want it to kind of, you want it to match a certain shape, but you still want that shape to be inferred.
Now, this sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this a feature that came out later on because of the issue that it has?
Absolutely. Right. It came out in the most recent version, actually. It came out in 4.9. And I was waiting for it for a long time. People were very, very excited about it. And now it's out, and it's absolutely fantastic. So there are all sorts of little use cases for it. If you're using something like Next.js, you can use it to like satisfy get server-side props or things like this. It's just, yeah, it's lovely. And for config objects like that you want to infer the specific properties while still having it, what am I talking about? While still having it set to a certain thing, then it's great.
Great. You have another big fan here that wants to give you a shout out. Says Matt is the best at teaching TypeScript.
Thank you.
I can see why he feels that.
I used to just come on these. No one would know who I was. And like, I could just fly under the radar. But now I'm pinging the radar everywhere. Yeah. Everyone's giving me a big head, you know.
But it comes across that you're really excited and you enjoy the teaching, and that makes people want to go through the ride with you. You know what I mean? Yeah, there are some like instructors that are just like, it's almost as if they're in pain, like explaining it, like they don't want to be there. Yeah, and then you don't want to be there learning with them either, you know. Yeah. So it's good, and I could feel the fun.
Well, I used to be a voice coach. You know that? I used to be a voice teacher and I've been a teacher for a lot longer than I've been a dev. I was a teacher for 6 years before I was a dev.
Well, that shows.
Thank you, man.
Now, Squishy Doe here. Yeah, I love some of the names here. Squishy Doe here says, able to discuss conditional params that are dependent on the value of another param. And then he writes, so my object.prop1 only required if my object.prop2 is true.
Nice. Give me that shared screen back. I've got a perfect example of this. Like the example I've got is like, imagine you have like a React component, and in this React component, this is probably true for like, I don't know, Angular and stuff as well, but like in components, like you are going to have props, and these props, let's say we have our component props here, for instance, and imagine that we have type component props, and we've got to pass this, let's say ID string, name string, whatever. Have you seen much React before? Like, is this all looking fairly familiar?
I am new with React, so I'm not an expert. This is almost foreign to me.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, basically, whoops, I need to do a little bit of setup. 2 seconds. Types React. Give me the latest version, please. Just hold your horses, everyone. React DOM. Pull in PMPMI, and then we're good to go. Cool. Oh, maybe not good to go. Not good to go. Okay, ignore this div. This div is fine. I'm just going to say return null. So basically what we have in React is we have components all over the place. And components, when you call them, you know what, because I can't get my React thing working, I'm actually just going to like discard this and do something else. So let's imagine that we have conditional types that are dependent on the value of another param. So what's a good example of this? Let's say that we have, oh yeah, perfect example. Someone asked about reducers earlier. And a reducer is basically, you have a function which takes in a state. So imagine we have a type of state and we have like count number, for instance, and then type action is going to be type increment or decrement. And let's say we have like what the reducer is going to do is, you know, GitHub CoPilot is going to write it all for me. This is very, very nice. It's basically when we call the reducer, we say const new state is a reducer, and we pass in the initial state, and then we increment it. And new state is then going to be count 1.
Wait, real quick question. So that you just mentioned CoPilot, you have CoPilot installed, and that it dropped that code in for you?
It dropped that code in for me very, very quickly.
Cool. Yeah. We got to make that shout out to CoPilot pretty clear then. That was cool.
Look at that. Whee! Oh, I love it. Nice. I love it so much. It's so nice when doing these demos as well, because it's, you know, it's got my back. So we've got a sort of funny issue here because we can pass in different action types to this. So we can pass in an increment or a decrement. But what if we wanted to pass in only when we have like an increment, we want to change this to like increment by, for instance. So we want to basically say, okay, we want to increment this by a certain number. But when we decrement, we only want to decrement by 1, for instance. Okay, well, we need to restructure this a bit, because if we say like, okay, amount number, then this amount number, it's only going to be useful on the increment by version of this action, right? We shouldn't be able to access increment, like the amount inside here, because inside decrement by 1, we should be able to go action.amount, and that should be an error. We shouldn't be able to access this. So I'll say this is illegal. I'm going to leave the bad spelling in. That's funny. Whereas in here, we should be able to say state.count plus action.amount. And this should be fine. But currently, action.amount is possibly undefined. But this is stupid. So we need to find a different way of declaring this. Are you with me so far in terms of the problem?
Yes.
Cool. So, okay, the way to do this is with what's called a discriminated union. Now, currently, this little thing is actually a union type. We're saying increment by or decrement by 1. But we need to move this union up 1 level. And this is actually going to live on the object now. So we're going to say or type decrement by 1. And now what we can do is we can say, okay, this whole object is going to be either type increment by or type decrement by 1. And this means that when we pass increment by, we also need to pass the amount. We have to pass it. And this little thing was making it optional before, but now I can remove this little bit of that little bit of syntax, which makes it required. So now when I call this, I can either pass in type decrement by 1 or increment by. Thank you, VS Code, for giving us these. This isn't CoPilot. This is VS Code giving me the nice autocomplete. And I can pass in decrement by 1. I don't need to pass in the amount now. But if I pass in increment by, then it's going to error until I pass in the amount. Nice. This now is properly illegal because property amount does not exist on type decrement by 1. So when you have one property that is tied to another property, then a discriminated union is the best way to go.
Got it. Got it. Now the term union, I know I've been more familiar with it like when it came with like SQL. So the definition of it, is it somewhat similar because we're in the way that we're using it right now?
I told you,
Or
man,
it's
I'm a one language developer. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know what a union is in SQL. You know, like a
oh, okay.
union here is basically just like an or. You know, it's just like a this or that. So if we had like imagine we have a const to string function, a room here, and we basically say, we'll export this, and we'll say the input is going to be, let's say it's going to be number. And then we return, let's say input to string. So now what we can say is to string, and we can call blah, 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 blah. But let's say we also, just in case we do this, for instance, we actually want to, and I'll just restart my TS server. We actually want this to like say, like we want to accept a string as well. We don't care. We don't care whether it's a number or a string. We just want it to accept either. So we can say number or string. We can even do number or string or Boolean if we want to. You can have as many union types as you want up to a certain level.
Okay.
So yeah, so this is basically just a this or that.
Nice. All right. So we are getting towards the tail end. I want to make sure we have time for our last segment, but let me catch a couple more comments here. Jonathan here says that this has been great so far. He loves this.
Woo!
And Squishy Dough is saying, thank you, Matt. And someone else is just like, OMG.
Nice. Slaying fools over here.
Nice. And also, little cousin says, please release the course for beginners. The course that you have, is it good for beginners also, or is it intermediate?
Yeah, I've got a free course for beginners that's up on Total TypeScript right now. So, little cousin, I've done it just for you. You know, it's right there. If you want to take it right now, you've got to sign it to my mailing list, I think, but that's, I think, a fair trade. Yeah, you can take it right now.
Awesome. Well, so I think this is a good point where we could like move into our next segment, which is the lightning round. Are you ready for that, Matt?
No, I'm not. I mean, you trailed the lightning round was, but you gave me no preparation, so I've no idea what's coming.
Perfect. And that's exactly. No one should know what kind of questions that they're going to get. So, producer, why don't we go ahead and kick that? 5 questions I'm going to ask. Don't spend more than 3 seconds thinking as an answer. Okay.
Okay.
What is your biggest pet peeve?
In coding or like in life? Sorry.
In coding, life. First thing that comes to mind.
I really hate overdone eggs. Overdone eggs are awful. Like you just gotta do your eggs just to the right level, and then just like take them off the pan immediately. You can't leave them in the pan, just like because you don't want to be eating rubber.
Yeah, no, I get that. Hard-boiled overdone eggs. That's the worst for me.
Oh yeah, it's like chalky, awful.
Yeah. Number 2, scariest thing you've ever done for fun.
I'm such a wuss. I don't do anything like I hardly do anything for fun, and so all of this stuff I do for fun is like playing chess and playing board games and stuff. I once played a absolutely terrifying man at chess where I went into central London and he was like punching the table because I was beating him, and then he left. It wasn't that scary.
That could have turned for like the wrong situation.
Could have been bad.
So yeah, I could see that being scary.
I'll take that. I bet I've got a different one. There's got to be a different one to that one. That one's awful.
GIF or GIF?
GIF. Let me tell you, the pronunciation coach is GIF.
That's the official, yeah. That's the official, the author of GIF. Is that what he pronounces it? Is that why you're saying that?
Well, no, he says GIF, but I mean, I believe in, I'm going to get high-minded for a second, Roland Barthes' death of the author idea, where when you release something out into the world, the author dies. They don't get to say anything about the product they've released. So I believe that it's GIF.
Nice. All right. Jason or JSON?
Jason.
I concur. Tabs or spaces?
I just use Prettier, man. So whatever Prettier does, I'm happy with. I tend to like tab, and then whatever Pretty does, I'm happy.
Whatever Pretty does. All right. I
I'm not
follow
entering that
Prettier.
debate.
All right. Cool. This has been awesome, Matt. Look, so I want to ask you, I know you mentioned once or twice in the stream, but for those who are just jumping on now, if everyone wants to follow you, what's the best way? What's your YouTube channel and
Yeah, I
socials if you
mean,
want to mention?
well, if we throw my screen up one more time, this like I've got this beautiful website here, which has become the TypeScript Wizard at your company. Got these amazing sort of wizard-based illustrations. We've got like an error message that I said I want this error message to look like it's coming from the depths of hell, you know, and it looks like that. Like, oh my god, this is just a beautiful, beautiful website. And I'd say go on there, check that out. I've got a mailing list which I'm starting to provide like free content on, bunch of articles, bunch of tips. And yeah, I think, and the best place to follow me, I think, is on Twitter, but I'm also releasing now a YouTube video every week and sometimes more than that, YouTube Shorts. Yeah, just find me, Matt Pocock. And if you find Matt Pocock Accents YouTube channel, just ignore him. You know, he's like old Matt Pocock. He's Matt Pocock with a little mustache and stuff. Don't look at that, but just look at new Matt Pocock, especially on YouTube.
Nice. All right, so you heard it here, folks. So check him out on his YouTube channel and that awesome website that he has, which will have all his other social media information. Thanks so much for joining, Matt, and thanks everybody else for joining. Please follow us also on our YouTube channel here, and we also have a TikTok. Do you have a TikTok that you have, or you're going to start eventually?
Yeah, but I'm rubbish at it. I don't know. I don't know how to do it really. I'm watching you guys for inspiration because you guys are killing it on TikTok.
Yeah. All right. Well, so thanks again, folks, and we will see you in the next stream. You're like,